What happens when high school students who've spent 7 months learning ways in which to advocate for arts education in New Jersey take the mic to share what they've discovered? Welcome to Art Isn't a Limit, an Arts at NJ Youth Ambassador podcast, an all-youth-led show where we explore how the arts transform lives, communities, and possibilities. Born from our Arts at NJ Youth Arts Education Council experience, this podcast amplifies the voices of young advocates who understand firsthand why creative expression matters.
Hi, my name is Anissa Monsanto, and I am a part of the Youth Arts Ed Council. Welcome to Art Isn't a Limit, an Arts at New Jersey podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing Olubayo Jackson, dancer, educator, and documentarian, and will explore how young children naturally communicate their inner world through art when words fall short, and how parents and educators can nurture this powerful form of expression to support cognitive and emotional development that continues throughout their growth. Welcome to the podcast, Olubayo.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, let's get started. So, my first question is, what are some key differences on how children express themselves through art versus words?
Through art versus
Words.
words, okay. Some key differences of how children express themselves through arts versus words. Well, I definitely feel that I'm qualified to answer that because I have been a teacher and an educator with young children for more than 20 years. And I have always, even though I've taught kindergarten, first grade, pre kindergarten, and other grades, I've always incorporated the arts and dance and movement into my education of young children. So, my very first position as a first grade teacher, I had a lot of students that had different learning needs. There was speech and language needs. There were sometimes behavioral issues. There were just a lot of needs in my classroom that were not being met in the traditional way. And so, what I realized was that I needed to work with my students to give them a different way of expressing themselves and also give them a different motivation for listening to me and engaging in the classroom. And I found that when I included dance and movement, first of all, immediately everybody was able to focus. I wasn't working against them because I was trying to read a story or have them look on a bulletin board and then saying, stop fidgeting, stop moving. Are you paying attention? Look here. Once I allowed them to engage themselves through their bodies and through movement, it worked with what they naturally wanted to do and what was developmentally appropriate for them. So we did everything from spelling out words in the morning by doing jumping jacks as we spelled them, to doing a science experiment on the water cycle and doing it through movement and letting our bodies be um, water evaporating into the clouds and later on coming down as rain, rain, rain. And what I discovered is that doing this with the actual science experiments and the books and everything else that was part of that curriculum allowed my children different ways to express what they were learning, especially because I was working in a dual language classroom that was English and Spanish, and it had a lot of newer immigrant students who couldn't necessarily express themselves all that they wanted to say in English. They were able to express the ideas and the concepts with their bodies. And then in doing that expression, they would do the movement. Sometimes they would add the sound words to it. We would add music to it. And eventually, I was able to see that they were using both the movements and the language. So I think movement is just one of the most natural ways that children express themselves from birth. Before they're even talking, they're moving, they're gesturing at things. They're like, give me this, or let's do that, and they're communicating with their body. So continuing that in education, I think is very, very important, especially for young children, because movement is freedom, movement is expression, and movement is joyful.
I agree. And just as you did, how can parents and educators educate encourage young children to use art as a form of expression, especially when language skills are still developing?
My mother likes to say that I was born dancing. Because my father was a jazz and R&B and gospel aficionado, and he literally had records lined from one end of the living room to the other. And he had the record players. I'm dating myself. He had record players so that when he played Miles Davis, he had the speakers hooked up to every room in the house. He could override whatever you were listening to in your room. And all of a sudden, Miles Davis would come through my bedroom, the living room, the hall. And my parents just encouraged me that any movement that I did was dance. Any movement I did was artistic and a worthy form of expression. I would hear that music and I would just come dancing down the hall. I would use the curtains that divided the living room from the hall and I would turn it into my own stage. And my mother and father would just go on right with it. Lou, what does that make you feel? It said kind of blue. Are you dancing blue? Is this your sadness or is this your joy? And I would go right along with it because they never gave me the feeling that to move or to dance, I needed to be putting on a performance. They gave me the feeling that movement and dance were just a part of our everyday life. And at any point you heard music, you could just begin it. And it was not just dance. My mother would carry me to the park when the leaves were turning. And the things that she would say would be poetry. She'd say, "Oh my goodness, look at this. The creator just dropped splats of orange and red and gold paint on these leaves. Look at this wonder." And right then and there, we would make up a poem or we'd make up a movement and that just carried on throughout my life. It really fueled a love of dance, it fueled a love of movement. It caused me later on to research dance and use it with young children. And I think that sometimes people feel they have to set the bar so high, especially educators, because now you're doing this in a classroom. You don't need a particular dance to teach children. You can read a poem and ask the children to be falling leaves. Right there, even stand up from their desk. And can you fall like the leaves are falling? Can you twirl and make a curvy pathway from your desk to the rug? And can you maintain some personal space? And as you're twirling like those leaves that are blowing in the wind, try not to bump into anyone as you move and twirl. The simplest things can be movement instruction for children. And the most important thing is that with really young children, they haven't really learned to self edit themselves. They are not self conscious. You can give them any kind of prompt, like, jump like a frog, leap like a butterfly, and they've got that third wall. They're so happy to be in that space and totally become what you're talking about. And then, even beyond that, the most magical thing I found is that when I give it to them, when I say work in a group and pick a topic of your choice and demonstrate that through movement, give us four movement that each child creates and decide together how you're going to layer that into a dance when the music comes on. I've been amazed to see not only what they did, but also what they explained and the themes that they explored. Sometimes it was the Arctic and riding in the snow and the different animals they saw, or the huskies pulling them. Sometimes it was something about their personal life and their family or their culture that they wanted to bring in and share. I think that one, it's giving the children practice in being free, practice and understanding that any movement they make can be art, and then also giving them the confidence to go out and do it themselves, bring their ideas.
In your opinion, what are some developmental milestones in art making that indicate cognitive and emotional growth in early childhood?
Hmm. Okay, well, the first thing that comes to mind that we looked at in the beginning of the year, I always worked with the physical and occupational therapist at my school. So the first thing we were looking for with the children were just benchmarks as far as their physical ability to do some of these movements, whether it was skipping or whether it was galloping or something simple as when you're walking down the stairs as a pre-K student, do they go from left to right, foot over foot as they're going down the steps, or do they stop and put each foot down on the step and then have to take a step with that same foot again? So we did that kind of benchmark for all of the students. And then as we were teaching movement, we also looked at some of the things that individual students and the majority of the class had problems with. And we made sure to include those in the dances that we were doing with the kids. For example, we had a whole entire dance that was built out of skipping and galloping and leaping. Basic things that even if you weren't doing dance, are part of the pre-K checklist of what your child can do developmentally and the milestones that they need to hit. And in that dance, we had them stand up and skip around the room in different pathways, skip like a butterfly. We had them stomp like a dinosaur. We had them gallop like a horse. And as they were doing this, they would find a partner, they would stop and meet that partner, and they would make connected movements with them. And we would have the most beautiful arches and bridges and contorted shapes, and then once they skipped to that partner and did those movements, they were free to go and skip in these beautiful pathways. So we went from one child doing these movements to a whole entire class of 4 year olds and 5 year olds who are skipping in pathways and creating dances without ever bumping into each other, but also choosing to connect with each other. And in that connection, I think that's one of the most important things in dance is this idea that you can connect with another person. For a young child, connecting with another person and collaborating. And they had to suggest to the other child what movement they would collaborate on without using their words. So they couldn't speak it. They had to intimate it using their bodies and using eye contact to show, you know what, I think we should try to do this. So that kind of collaboration and working together is a major milestone, and also being able to move independently, having confidence that whatever you're doing from that first movement that for my children, that when they would say, I can't dance, Miss Olubayo, I said, well, can you walk? If you can walk and even move your finger, you're doing the beginning of a dance. And then from there, I think it grows to being able to follow a dance, being able to create, to move with a pattern, just creating a repeating pattern. The first I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this movement, and then I come back and I do it all again. That kind of unity, and then that expressive movement that we do when we're doing a solo or giving our own expression of self. All of those are just really important milestones in dance. And I really feel like dance is both. I was trained in African dance specifically, and I've traveled all over the world looking at dances in the diaspora that also show a connection to African dance. And yes, I learned specific steps. I learned specific traditions that had meaning to the peoples who created them. And I learned a lot about those cultures by doing those steps and understanding the traditional ways of doing those dances. But then there was always a time when we could be free. And in that time when you soloed, well, okay, in the beginning, I think I felt like, oh my God, I can't remember the step that was done. Because you know, you get out there and you freeze. Those drums are going, and it's like, oh, well, is it right foot first, and then do I twirl, and then do I shake my hips? And I think the most liberating thing for me that I try to give to my students is actually it doesn't matter. You can feel the rhythm and you can shake, you can twirl, you can shift. When you are carried by that rhythm, your movement is something that other people can feel. They can just feel the movement and they can feel your connectedness to it. And it didn't matter whether you were doing cuckoo or manjani, whether you threw in a little bit of Congolese here or there, whether you did the bump that your mama taught you, you can just open that space and radiate joy and flow with it. So I think that that is also one of the milestones, being able to use dance as tradition, as learning about culture, as learning about yourself, as preserving your history and your lineage, and learning about other cultures. And then also being able to create dance and movement that's just purely for your self expression. So it's both.
Throughout your career and watching these kids grow, how are these skills still prominent?
How are the skills still prominent in the children that I've taught over the years?
Yes.
Okay, well, I've had a good opportunity to watch my students from year to year to year. First of all, when I started in the classroom at the earliest levels, I was able to just watch where they started from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And I think for me, wow, that's a deep question and a good question because it's answerable on so many levels. One, behaviorally and engagement, like I mentioned, when I first started teaching, I had a lot of the students who were supposed to be, at that time, they were self contained classrooms for special education and special needs, and even a special district for students that had very extreme special needs, that where they were considered not really to be functioning in the classroom. And I had a class where a lot of children were expected to go to self contained classrooms, but hadn't gone. Their parents hadn't signed the IEPs or they wanted to give them another chance. And they were all put in the same classroom with me. So I had to think quickly of what I was going to do to motivate these students and reach them. And what I definitely was sure of was they had had enough consequences in their short lives for that not to be something that worked. That was not going to be the main thing that connected them. I had to build some joy and some things they wanted to do and some praise and some self confidence and some self esteem in my students. And I had to find a way that wouldn't go against what they naturally did. What they naturally did was move. And so I started incorporating movement into everything we did. And I even continued it by having an African dance club after school. This was purely accidental. It wasn't because I said one day or someone came to me and hired me and said, Miss Jackson, would you create an African dance class? It was that their parents were working. And so they didn't necessarily pick up the children on time. And the children would hang around either in my classroom or they'd be sitting in the hall by our beloved school guard, Mr. Nelson, and have nothing to do. So I started passing my kids would say, Miss Olubayo, can I go with you? Yeah, you can go with me. Come on back. Well, they came with me and we started dancing. We're doing African dance. And after a while, my children got so good at what they were doing and they were so excited and happy when they came back that the other children who were not even in my class and in much higher grades started to ask could they come too. Well, this made a tremendous difference. I literally, wow, I almost feel emotional talking about it. My children changed so much that many of them, when it finally came time for their IEPs to go through, they were maintained in the general education classroom with support because the main thing that was going on with them were behavioral issues. And what they needed was time, they needed attention, they needed love, they needed to be confident that they could do something and do it really well. And the dancing after school gave them a pride in their heritage because that's what we started with. Hey, We all come from Africa. Did you know that? These are some of the great things that go on there, and you come from this greatness. And this is one of the ways that it shows itself up in your Puerto Rican culture, in your Dominican culture, in your African American culture. It showed itself up even just in the generalized American culture, in the dances that you do, listening to those music videos. There was no TikTok dances. And the children changed to the point that these kids who could not listen, God, I did not want the principal to come and do an observation because I'd be trying to read and manage behavior. So and so, could you sit down? Well, so and so, please stop talking to her. But so these same children did a Kwanzaa show that was out of this world. And another teacher came in and saw it and said, this shouldn't be something you do in your classroom. This should be something you do for the whole school. And what it actually became was that because I had gone to Africa and lived in Ghana, it became a whole entire museum that we put on. From doing the dances to tie dyeing the clothes to making cloth for the background with the Adinkra stamps to even rolling our own jewelry. And those children came out there and put on a performance that not only could people not believe, they went to go and represent the district at the multicultural fair. So I got to watch them change from start to finish, not only from the beginning to the end of the year. Their teachers would come back to me. The guidance counselors would come back to me. The special educate people who created their IEPs and were their support services would come back to me and tell me how much they had changed and thank me. And then I, in turn, changed right along with them. I became more creative. I became more confident um, with my performance, because what is teaching if not sometimes a performance on stage? Sometimes you feel horrible, you got a cold, it was a bad day, you want to shed a tear. But that's not what the children need you to give. And you have to learn how to give something else. So that actually spawned me becoming a dance educator later on for 500 students from grade pre-K through fifth grade. And then I could really see their shifts and change because I would have them year after year after year. Um, I saw their confidence shift. I saw children who were so shy that they didn't want to do anything. When I invited their parents in and let their parents do a dance that was part of their culture, I saw them come and become the star of the class and actually come. And I had one student who really found it hard even to walk down the stairs and not occasionally trip, have his mother come in and start teaching a dance from his culture. And he became the teacher right along with her. He was teaching his class to the point that he was even sending the videos of his lessons for the children to follow when we stopped being in person and we became remote. He was sending these videos and he was inspiring these children, and all of a sudden, these children who were sitting in their homes and having to sit at one seat in one spot by their computer when we're doing the work remotely were getting up and dancing. They were not feeling shy when I would spotlight them to be the star and show everyone else what they were doing. They would bring their parents, they would bring the babies. Even at one time, we had cats and pets joining into these dances. And the feedback that I was getting was just that it was so amazing for them to be able to still have this kind of connectedness with each other, even if they were just 100 little boxes on their computer, but not one on one, just listening to the teacher and the screen just being there. They were moving. And I felt like that really created community for us. So I saw them through that, and I saw them as they moved all the way up from the lowest grades to become fifth graders. And by the end of it, we used to do these big graduation dances, and It was a challenge. I didn't know how all those kids, I think there were about 200 of them, were going to dance at the same time. We had children on the stage, children on the aisles, children who were sitting in seats that you wouldn't even expect them to pop up. And we ended up having like a mashup of an East Indian dance. It was kind of a Bollywood, and then there was hip hop involved in it, and there was African dance. And the children themselves started putting in the movements. They would start with what I had, and then we would have them work in groups, and they would vote on the movements they wanted for the ultimate dance that they would all be doing with their parents. And you wouldn't believe the level of growth in opening themselves up, presenting to a class, showing their work and being okay with the fact that they might not be picked and then they would have to support their peers. Creating their own forms of dance notation so that they could draw and explain these steps to their classmates, working in a group to teach everybody else, even going forward and teaching other classes, because there were 5 different classes doing this. And so they would have to come and be guests to teach the movements to everyone else. And when I saw them on that stage, every child in unison doing their own part, yeah, it was awe inspiring because I could see kids that I had had from pre-K or kindergarten and how they had grown in confidence, in precision, in rhythm, in teamwork, in just knowing that it was okay to shine and that they could do it. And that's where I saw them grow.
I think what you said shows how it doesn't just stay prominent with them, but it expands on to other people, and the skills will show up for others.
Oh, I
So
do actually just want to add one thing. For me, one of the biggest things that I try to do with education, because I started in education through culture. I was an international studies major. My love was cultural anthropology. And in my own life, I've always really strived to use dance as a way of promoting understanding who you are yourself. And then as a way of breaking down barriers and breaking down stereotypes that we have about other groups of people based on the way that they have been portrayed. So I really also have seen dance shift children's openness to other groups of people. And in my first experience, even as a teacher, as a substitute, I went to a school that was largely Dominican, Puerto Rican, also partially African American, wearing an African outfit, and a kid yelled, "Unga bunga oo." I said, "What have you yelled?" He said, "I'm speaking African." And it was not in a good way at all. It was in a negative way. And I said, "Well, what language is that? African?" And that came with a laugh. And at that moment, I think that was one of the defining moments that changed me from being just a substitute who was going to go back to school in cultural anthropology to deciding that I wanted to do a master's in education at Columbia University. And it was because I decided at that moment that instead of being shamed, it would be a teachable moment for me. And I was going to teach everyone in that class some love and respect for Africa and our African origins, but also some acceptance of the Black part of their culture and just the whole part of their culture, the indigenous part of their culture, the Spaniard part of their culture, but an understanding that for most of us, we're not just one thing. We have all these different ancestral lines running through our veins, and all of them have to be respected. And so a lecture wasn't going to do it. But when I came back the next time, I was prepared. I had a story, but not only did I have a story, I had some Congolese soukous music, and it sounded just like bachata and merengue to my students. So I started playing it, and they say, "Hey, that's it. This is my music. This is my culture." We started doing the movement. We're doing the movement. We were doing the dances. After a while, I said, "What language do you hear?" I said, "Is it Spanish?" They said, "No, miss, that's not Spanish. It must be French." No, it's not French. It's Lingala. This is an African language from Central Africa. It's not Unga Bunga Oo. It's this. Well, the children were so, by then, engaged in the dance. They were so happy to be doing it, and it resonated so much with them because the dance and the music and the rhythm said something that my words actually couldn't say, that they were thrilled not only to do the dance, they along, someone came and saw me doing it and said, "Can you collaborate the kindergarten graduation dance? Can you come in and instead of doing this as a sub, can you have a halftime position as a literacy and movement teacher?" Well, by the end of it, when I told the kids I was going to Africa, they said, "Oh, Miss Olubayo, I'm African too. Pack me in your suitcase and take me with you." But not only did that happen, they started having a greater respect for each other. It was less about, "I'm Puerto Rican and no, you're Dominican, so which of us is on top?" Well, no, I'm African American and no, I'm this. It was this unified understanding of each other's culture because along with those dances, we incorporated the kids' dances. And that made them try it. And when they tried it, they put themselves in the mindset and the positions of their classmates. And the cultural background went in without even having to use words. It just went in because children that you can dance with, you can talk with, you can play with, you can hang out with, and all of a sudden these barriers just started to disappear. And I think for myself, after having used dance as my own way to enter and communicate with other cultures around the world, and having done a global international pen pal project with my kids in New York and children in Africa and in Dominica and in Belize and just all over, that is the biggest thing that I saw when I asked the children in the beginning what they thought about this particular culture and what they understood versus asking them what they thought about it in the end. um, Leaps and bounds in the complexities of what they thought about the culture they were learning about, whether it was their peers in the classroom or whether it was a child that they were watching a video of and listening to from around the world. That kind of understanding that the same complexity and depth that you have in your own culture and the same diversity of different ways of being is the same that everyone has in theirs. And just being able to look more deeply, look more empathetically, and this stopping of the othering. This othering where we always think that someone else somewhere is the other and that their culture is exotic and it's in one place. If you are doing African dance, it's by a hut in the village, and that is it. And when I not only taught them the dances, but also showed the videos of kids in the streets of Accra, the capital of Ghana, doing hip hop next to these tall buildings with the same kind of get up that they were wearing. It was an eye opening thing that every culture does not exist frozen in a moment in time, but has also changed and developed over time. There's cultural change and there's continuity. And every culture is also merged and been influenced by what's around them. So they were really surprised to see that not only was this African dance in there, there was hip life or Afro beats. And the kids could identify, like, hey, there's that hip hop in there. Wait, was that some reggaeton that just jumped in there? Was that a little bit of salsa that all of these influences were in there? And I think that really gave the children the understanding that children everywhere in the world were maintaining what they had, and they were also taking in, they were learning, and they were growing, and that culture is dynamic. So if you're speaking to someone, you don't just speak to them from a perceived notion. You ask, and you ask with an open mind to grow and learn what their life is like, and you accept there'll be a diversity of experience and not just one narrative.
So, for my final question, how can the audience connect with you and find more about you?
Ah. I love that question. So I am teaching right now in the Cayman Islands. I teach first grade to a lovely group of children. I used to teach for more than 25 years at the Board of Education, different public schools in New York City. But I'm also a dancer. I do African dance. I have traveled literally all over the world, just looking at dances that when I see them and when I feel them have a feeling of an African culture to me, and going around the world to these communities. So I literally, back in 2014, had a sabbatical where that was what I did. I would just book a ticket into a country, started in Ghana, went through Mali and Senegal and Burkina, and then went to other countries as they were having their festivals, Dominica, Honduras, Belize, the Gullah Geechee culture in the South, New Orleans with second line dancing. Um, and that actually spawned a documentary of over 10 years. It's called the Aquaba Dance Project. One small part of it when I was beginning that, and the Pen Pal project that I did with my students, is on YouTube now. And from then, I also created a documentary called Ring Shout, Let the Circle Be Unbroken, that is about me having gone around the world to all of these countries and then discovered my own Gullah Geechee heritage in Georgia and South Carolina. And when I say Gullah Geechee, I mean African Americans who maintained a strong connection to Africa and maintained a lot of our linguistic patterns, spiritual patterns, dance and movement patterns, particularly in a movement that we call the ring shout, which is a form of praise worship, and mainly because of our isolation in along the coast in South Carolina, especially after slavery ended. And so that's something that people can look out for. I'm turning that into a feature length film. I'm also currently working on a curriculum that is merging, because everywhere I go, I see connections, that is merging the cultural continuum between us as Gullah Geechee people in South Carolina and Georgia and Afro Caymanians in the Cayman Islands along our tradition of basket weaving and looking at how this weaving of the African basket connects us to our heritage, particularly in West Africa and places like Sierra Leone, where literally you can go and look and see almost the same baskets being woven. And just looking at that as a microcosm for how we're connected as groups of people. As African American and as Caribbean people, and then how that spreads out in the dance, in the foodways, in the language. My mother came and literally, her and the other 90-year-old basket weaver needed no translation. They understood each other perfectly. So I've been doing firsthand interviews and recording this and also making a curriculum and connecting it to Africa. And that is something that will be coming out as a hybrid course that I'll teach. And hopefully, if funding goes well, we'll also have an in person workshop at Gichi Kunda, which is the museum that my long lost branch of the family owns. um, which I've been working on getting a lot of that information digitized so it can come out in the world. And the idea is really just for young people to become griots themselves. A lot is changing in education. And with these changes, there are a lot of things that teachers may not be able to say anymore about our history as African based people here in America. And that doesn't mean that it ends. We have always been a people who have passed down the majority of our culture and tradition orally. And a lot of that oral passing on also extended to passing it on through movement. People would send messages about their escape. People would connect to their traditional belief systems. People would record history and the battles of people in dance and movement. And if you look at our dances, you can see the entire history of who we were, starting from like a ring shout and a buzzard lope, to looking at somebody doing the boogaloo, to looking at somebody doing his disco, to getting all the way up to hip hop, to young kids in the street doing Afro beats. Dance has always been a way of having resistance. And it's been something subversive that even when we weren't allowed to play drums or speak or even carry our names, we carried it through dance. So, what I want to see is young people going back to their own families. Y'all got those little powerful iPhones and Androids and iPads and the next of whatever you have, and people also often look at the negative aspect of that, but it's also a really powerful tool for young people like yourself to interview their own family members, to record their traditions, to record their dances, to make videos that they share with others and just keep that passing through. So I would love for people to connect with me and just follow me, to wait for this curriculum to come out, maybe to participate. I have a website. It's called the Aquaba Dance Project. If you look up anything related to Aquaba Dance Project, which is AKWAABA, Aquaba, which means welcome in the Twi language of Ghana, and Aquaba Dance Project in Olubayo Jackson, you will see the blogs that I've done, the website, and eventually I'm going to put more of my work out on YouTube because I can't tell young people that they need to share and express themselves freely and then gatekeep the work that I've done for the last more than 10 years on this documentary. So I'm working with some brilliant young people in Cayman Islands right now that are beginning film students. And they said, Miss Olubayo, can we take some of this and put it on a TikTok? Can we put this on a YouTube channel? Can we put some of these things up there and build some interest for what's going on? And my thought was immediately, well, I'm not that technologically advanced. I don't know how to do that. And they said, but we do. So I am also in my own ways, just like the torch was passed to me to carry on a lot of our history and our culture. I'm also passing it on to young people, and I'm looking forward to people who want to collaborate and help me get more of that message out there. In the curriculum, there's going to be a part in the website where not only can children listen to the interviews that I'm recording of our elders, they can record and upload their own family stories. So definitely, I'm looking forward to all of that. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, send me a message, which is how I was found. And my email is olubayojackson2@yahoo.com or the Aquaba Dance Project at Gmail. So reach out, and I look forward to collaborating with you.
Well, thank you, Olubayo, for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I think what you're doing is something so powerful. I think what your teacher has you doing is really building leadership, which is so important in our young people. And I love that you are creating those firsthand narratives because so often in our culture, we wait for another person to quote unquote discover us. What we've already been doing, what already had a value, what already was meaningful and was art. And we wait for someone to come and say, hey, this is art. When I was growing up, hip hop wasn't art, and it definitely wasn't going to be taught in anybody's dance studio. It was just what young kids were doing in the street, and someone came and gave it value. So I think that you are doing that, and I think you're the next generation to carry that forward.
Thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for joining us on Art Isn't a Limit, where youth voices lead the conversation about the transformative power of arts education. If you'd like to learn more about ArtsEd NJ's Youth Arts Ed Council, visit our website at artsednj.org.